The sky was the color of ashes, and the wind carried a silence that seemed older than anything I'd known. My hands clutched the worn shawl tied around my shoulders, the weave of it rough against my neck, my mother's shawl, long since faded and smelling faintly of dust and pine smoke. I sat in the back of the mule cart like a sack of oats, knees knocking from the cold, not just of the weather, but of what was waiting. Papa hadn't said a word the whole ride up the canyon trail, not since sunrise, not since he spat once and muttered something about making the best of what's left. I didn't ask what that meant. I already knew. The camp came into view slow and sudden at once, a scatter of low shelters tucked near the rocks, smoke curling from a few cooking fires, and a watchful quiet that settled like a weight over my chest. There were children running, barefoot, their laughter quick and sharp, their eyes pausing only long enough to recognize the strangeness of me. The cart halted. The mule snorted and shook its bridle. Papa didn't get down. He just leaned back, arms folded, his hat shadowing his face. "That's him," he said, jutting his chin toward a man standing alone, maybe 20 paces off. "Name's Taza. Don't expect nothing fancy." I turned to look at him. Taza. He stood motionless, tall, wrapped in a deerskin jacket darker than the rest of him. His hair was long, braided once, low. His face didn't show anything, no welcome, no disgust, just stillness. But even from here, I saw the scars. One ran along his cheekbone, thin as a drawn string. Another, deeper, split his collarbone. My boots hit the dirt hard. Papa stayed seated. "You'll be fed," he said flatly. "Better than starving out here. Don't shame us." And then, to Taza, as if I weren't even there, "You got what you came for?" Taza didn't answer. Papa flicked the reins and turned the cart. The wheels clattered back down the trail without a glance back. No hug, no blessing, no goodbye. I stood there, the dust from the retreating cart settling around my hem, and I felt it. Not fear, not exactly, just hollowness, like the center of me had been scraped clean. Taza watched me a moment longer. Then he turned his head toward one of the shelters, a low, rounded structure of bark and hide with a narrow flap for a door. He didn't speak, just gave a short nod. I walked, each step heavier than the last. The eyes of the camp followed. A woman in beaded cloth whispered something sharp to another. A boy snickered and mimicked my stiff walk. I kept my gaze low, the red earth like fire beneath my feet. Inside, the shelter was small and spare. A cot on one side, a mat on the other. A carved bowl sat in the center with a few coals smoldering beneath. A single shawl hung from a peg. Everything smelled of pine, smoke, and something bitter I couldn't name. Taza didn't follow me in. I heard his footsteps move away, steady and even, then fade completely. I sank down onto the mat. My body ached not from the ride, but from the weight of being handed off like barter. I touched the edge of my mother's shawl, now wrapped tightly around my shoulders, and thought of the kitchen table back home, where the wood was worn soft from her hands, of the crackling fire, of her hum as she braided my hair. I didn't cry, not yet, not here. I stared at the small fire until it blurred, and I felt the silence wrap itself around me. That night, he brought food. He didn't knock or say anything, just laid the wooden bowl near the door and stepped back into the dark. I watched him leave, backlit by a sliver of moonlight. He moved like someone who didn't want to disturb the world. I ate in silence, beans warm and plain, but they filled something that had been empty. The children laughed outside. One called me a ghost. Another threw a pebble that landed just outside the door. I didn't move. I didn't answer. When the fire burned low, I lay down on the cot and turned to the wall. The earth beneath me was cool, and the roof rustled faintly with the wind. No prayer came to mind, only a single sentence, whispered like breath. "You're not gone. You're just somewhere else now." It was all I had. Asterisk, asterisk, the mornings came cold. Not winter cold, but canyon cold, where your fingers ache from touching water and your breath hangs like smoke in the light. I rose before the sun, not from duty, but because sleep refused me. The earth floor was hard, but familiar now, like the ache in my spine that reminded me I was still living. Taza never entered unless he needed something. He'd leave a strip of smoked meat, a bowl of beans, once a small pouch of salt. Then he'd vanish again to wherever he went hunting, riding, watching the land the way a hawk watches a field. Sometimes I saw him sharpening a blade near the fire, his expression unreadable. Other times, he spoke in low tones with elders under a cottonwood, never glancing my way, But once, as he passed the shelter, his hand brushed the doorframe not by accident, not deliberately, just acknowledgement. I swept the floor with a bundle of dry sage tied with horsehair. I mended one of his worn shirts that he'd left folded on the bench. He never asked. I never explained, but stitching gave my hands something to do while my mind wandered back to places it shouldn't go. Mama's hands in my hair, braiding gently each morning before school, the cracked mirror above the wash basin where I learned to call myself plain before anyone else had to. 3 days passed before I noticed it, a small carving left on the corner of my mat, cedar, soft and fragrant, a bird wings folded, body leaning slightly to one side, like it had fallen mid-flight. I held it in my hand for a long while. No note, no voice to explain it, but I understood. It was broken, but not discarded. That night, I sat by the fire alone and traced the wings with my thumb. The sky outside was the color of smoke and ink. I could hear a drumbeat faint and far from the center of the camp, but here, only silence. Down my braid lay heavy against my back. I reached for it without thinking. One long, thick strand I had never cut, not even after Mama passed. It felt foreign now, like it belonged to someone else. I took the knife I used for peeling potatoes and sliced clean through it. The weight of it fell into my lap like a fallen rope. I held the severed braid for a moment, then placed it gently into the fire. It hissed, curled, and turned to ash. I watched until there was nothing left. No applause, no ceremony, but something inside me shifted. I hadn't shed tears for my mother when she died. I hadn't wept when my father gave me away like Tretd. But now watching that simple braid disappear, I felt something come loose in my chest. Maybe grief wasn't always loud. Maybe it was the quiet things, the cutting of hair, the silence after. Later, as I lay on the mat, I whispered my name aloud. Eliza, soft, fragile, like trying on a word that had worn thin from misuse. Eliza Boone, once the girl with the braid, now a woman, with ash on her hands and a wooden bird beside her bed. Taza came back late that night. I didn't hear him at first, but I saw his shadow cross the firelight. He paused in the doorway. He didn't speak. His eyes flicked to the fire, then to my lap, where the carving still rested. I thought he might say something, ask why my hair was different. He didn't. He only nodded once, deeply, and left again. But that nod, it felt like a sentence, maybe even a story, maybe even a beginning. And for the first time since the cart dropped me here, I didn't feel like something given away. I felt placed. It began with a whine low, rolling over the canyon like a restless spirit, the kind of wind that makes even the trees go still. By dusk, the sky had turned the color of old iron, and smoke from the cooking fires hung low. UNMOVING.TAZA returned early that day. No words, no explanation. He tied his horse near the cedar post and checked the roof for the shelter without glancing inside. Then he disappeared around the back, where I heard him anchoring hides, weighing down anything that might fly. The rain came sudden, angry. It lashed the hide roof with the sound of rifle fire. The earth outside turned to red soup. I stood by the doorway for a moment, watching it fall, relentless, cleansing, a live dot, then a shadow passed. Taza stepped into the shelter without asking. He was soaked to the skin, his jacket leaving rivulets down his arms. He said nothing, only took off his boots, placed them near the fire, and sat on the mat across from mine. It was the first time we'd shared the same space without the door between us. The storm howled. The fire crackled low, casting flickers across the walls. I stoked it silently. When I handed him the clay cup of coffee I'd brewed from the last of the grounds, his fingers brushed mine. A spark, not a jolt but a warmth, like memory. He didn't pull away. He simply nodded, eyes steady. Hours passed with only the fire between us. I listened to the thunder while he carved, slowly, precisely. Something in his shoulders softened. He was not afraid of storms, that much I could see, but he respected them, sat with them like old friends. Lightning lit the room briefly, revealing the map of scars across his collarbone and ribs, long, curved, healed into his skin like stories carved deep. "Where did you get them?" I asked softly. It was the first time I had spoken since the rain started. He looked at me, surprised, maybe. Then he answered, "Fighting for people who thought I owed them my rage." He took a breath. "I don't fight anymore." Silence again, but this one was different, full, not empty, as if his words still lingered in the air like smoke. I wrapped Mama's shawl tighter around my shoulders. The firelight danced on the folds. The scent of cedar and rain filled the room, heavy and grounding. I wanted to ask him more about the woman I'd once heard the others whisper about whether he'd chosen this life of silence or if it had been forced on him, but I didn't. Instead, I spoke a name, my own, Eliza. It left my mouth like a confession. He nodded. Once, Eliza, he repeated, the sound strange on his tongue, but careful. We sat like that for a long time to strangers with no shared past, no promises, no future plans, just a fire, a storm, and the fragile thread of something not quite spoken between us. The thunder eased as dawn teased the edge of the sky. The air was thick with soot and the scent of wet clay. Taza stood and moved toward the door. Before stepping out, he turned and looked at me. His voice was low, almost lost beneath the storm's retreat. You're not what they said. Then he was gone. I sat by the embers until they cooled to gray, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I didn't dread the silence. I welcomed it. Asterisk, spring whispered its way through the canyon slow and quiet, like it was afraid to be noticed. Snowmelt made the creek babble louder than the voices in camp. The children ran more freely now, and even the elders came out from their shelters to sit in the returning warmth. But not everyone welcomed the change. I begun learning words in Taza's language, simple things at first. Sky, water, fire. He never sat to teach me, not formally, but he'd gesture, speak low, and wait for me to repeat. His lips barely moved. His patience was endless still. Not all eyes were kind. A widow named Suni, tall and sharp-eyed, watched me with the heat of coals behind her stare. Once, as I walked past with a bundle of firewood, she muttered something and spat at my feet. I didn't understand the words, but I knew their weight. I told myself not to feel it. But shame walks close behind you when you've been given away like stocked out later that week. A trapper from the nearby trading post visited the camp. He was white tall, reeking of whiskey and muscan. When he saw me, he let out a barking laugh. Well, I'll be, he said loud enough for everyone, if it ain't Ugly Boone's girl. Didn't know you fetched yourself a red husband. Sweetheart. I froze. Taza was across the fire ring. He didn't speak, didn't look at the man. He only picked up his blade and began sharpening it with calm, deliberate strokes. The rhythm of the steel against stone was louder than the trapper's laughter. The man's smile faltered. He left soon after. That night, I cooked flatbread and boiled roots. It wasn't much, but it filled the shelter with warmth. Taza came in late. His shoulders were streaked with dust, his hair wind-blown. He sat without a word. I handed him his plate. He handed mine. There was only one knife between us. I offered it across the small fire pit. Our fingers touched. A pause. He didn't pull back. Neither did I. In that moment, something passed between us. Not desire. Not yet. But trust unspoken. Fragile. Powerful. He took the knife slowly, eyes never leaving mine. I felt my heartbeat in my palms. After we ate, he gestured toward the mat opposite mine. I nodded. He unrolled a small pouch of dried herbs and began to work with them. His hands moved with reverence, grinding, folding, pressing. I watched, not out of curiosity, but something deeper, like watching someone build something you didn't know you needed. I reached for the bird carving on the edge of my mat. It was worn now, the wings smooth from my touch. I held it in my hands and whispered without meaning to. Do you think the wings still remember what flying felt like? Taza looked up. His voice was soft. They do. He didn't smile, but his eyes changed, as if something old inside him had heard me. That night, as I lay down to sleep, I found a second carved figure near my blanket, a flame, small, carved from the same wood, flickering in shape like it had been caught dancing. I placed it beside the bird. Then I whispered a quiet thank you to the darkness, and for the first time in a long while, I slept without dreaming of home. The celebration came without warning. Drums began before sunset, slow, steady, calling people from shelters and fires. A feast was being held in honor of the new season. Smoke curled from roasting meats, and voices rose with laughter, singing. Footsteps and dust. I stood at the edge of it all, unsure whether I was meant to stay hidden or step forward. Taza found me near the edge of the clearing. He didn't speak. He only handed me a strip of sweet corn wrapped in bark and nodded toward the firelight. I followed. We sat near the circle, but apart from the crowd. He didn't like noise, I learned. He watched everything: the children chasing one another, the women dancing with shawls extended like wings, The way the old men smoked and told stories with hands more than mouths. I kept the corn untouched. In my lap, my hands were shaking, though I wasn't cold. Later that night, I slipped away. Back inside the shelter, I reached deep into the bottom of the satchel I'd arrived with. Wrapped in faded cloth, stuffed between a threadbare shift and old letters, was the dress. Mama's dress. The lace was yellowed at the edges. It had once been white, though I barely remembered her wearing it. Only the scent of wildflowers that clung to it, the way she folded it as if it still meant something. It had been meant for me, for the wedding that never came. I didn't know why I put it on. Maybe I wanted to see if it still fit. Maybe I wanted to remember that once I'd been told I'd be worth loving someday. It hung loose on me now, but something about the weight of it grounded me. I stepped outside barefoot into the cool night, where the fire still crackled low. Taza was there. He didn't startle. He didn't stare. He looked at me as though I was just myself, no prettier, no plainer, just seen. He stood slowly and, without a word, removed the belt that held his rifle, set it down on the rock beside him. A small gesture, but it felt like a gate swinging open. We sat in silence for a while. Then he spoke. She wore blue. I looked at him. Who? He didn't look at me when he answered. The one they took. His voice was made of gravel and something softer. She braided feathers into her hair. She used to say the wind listened to her. I believed it. A pause. I was gone one night too long. When I came back, there were tracks, blood, her dress torn. I never found her. I didn't speak. I didn't touch him, but I let the firelight hold us both. He said, I didn't think I'd care for anyone again. My throat tightened. I didn't know what to say. All I could offer was truth. I never thought anyone would want to. He turned toward me. The firelight danced in his eyes. I do. His voice cracked on the word, like it surprised even him. I reached for his hand, slowly, like lifting something sacred. Our fingers touched. He didn't move away. Our palms pressed together. Not tight, not rushed, just real. The fire popped between us. In the distance, a drumbeat still echoed faintly. But here, in the ring of light, nothing else moved. I leaned my head against his shoulder. He let out a breath, long, shaking, like something had left him. We sat like that until the coals turned to embers, until the stars spun higher overhead. When we stood, he didn't look at the dress. He didn't comment. But as he reached for his rifle belt, I saw him pause, and instead of putting it on, he left it by the fire. Asterisk, asterisk, the days that followed were softer. Not easier, not safer, just gentler, like the earth had shifted beneath us without anyone noticing. Taza still rose before light, still rode out with his bow slung, and his eyes always scanning the horizon. But now, when he returned, he brought 2 cups instead of 1, 2 pieces of bread, 2 places at the fire. I still slept on the mat. He still slept on the cot, but the space between us no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a path, and then came the sound of hooves. It was near sundown, when I heard them, more than one horse, moving fast, careless. I stepped outside to see 3 riders approach the edge of camp. Taza had just returned from the ridge. He didn't look surprised, only tired. The man in front wore a wide-brimmed hat and a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Well, she's still alive, he said, loud, like it was a joke. I recognized him instantly, the trapper from before. You missing home, girl? He sneered. Pabon sent us to fetch you back. Said he made a mistake letting some red savage have you. We're here to correct that. I didn't speak. My hands were steady. I took one slow step backward toward Taza. He stepped forward, rifle already in hand. He didn't aim it. Not yet. But the way he stood said more than bullets ever could. She stays. He said. The trapper laughed. She ain't yours. Taza's voice was quiet. She's not yours either. The other 2 men shifted. Their horses tossed nervously. The air was still. Then Dash cracked. The rifle fired once, straight into the sky. The echo rolled through the canyon like a THUNDERCLAP. The men jolted. One horse bucked, but no one moved after that. Taza lowered the rifle. I don't need to shoot. You, he said. You've already lost. And he turned his back. He walked away, and I, without fear, without doubt, walked after him. The trapper muttered something under his breath, but they left, because there was nothing here for them. Not anymore. That night, I waited until the fire was low. Taza sat on the cot, shirt loose, his long hair unbound for once, falling past his shoulders. He didn't look up when I stepped forward, but I knew he felt me there. In my hands, I held a strip of something old. My braid, or what remained of it. Not much. Just one thin rope I'd saved in secret, wrapped in muslin, like a piece of something sacred. I sat beside him, our knees brushing. He watched me as I twisted the braid, slowly, gently, into a circle. It wasn't perfect, crooked, uneven, fraying at one edge, but it was mine. I lifted his hand and slipped the braid over his thumb, then to the base of his finger. He looked at it for a long time, then at me. "No priest," he said. "No need," I whispered. His hand closed around mine. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. Our silence had always said more. By spring's end, I rode beside him. The people in the camp no longer looked through me. The children asked me for stories in broken English, and I told them what I could about rivers that froze solid, and snow that came up to your waist, and the taste of cinnamon bread on Sunday mornings. Sometimes we visited the ridge and looked out over the whole valley. He showed me where he used to hunt, where he buried his brother, where he once ran from soldiers, and once, only once, he pointed to the horizon and said, "I would have gone there, if not for you." I leaned my head on his shoulder. The rifle he once carried never returned to his back. It remained mounted above the shelter door, wrapped in red cloth. We never needed it again, and me. I wore no dress after that night, but I did wear feathers. In my hair, 2 of them, one for the woman he lost, one for the woman I was still becoming. We were not what they gave us. We were what we chose to be, together.